Today on CityCast Denver, the National Women's Soccer League Stadium is a go, sort of. We dig into the City Council vote to support it and the long road and many votes ahead. Plus, will Denver apartment buildings ever get the recycling and composting services voters said yes to back in 2022? Me and producer Paul Karolyi are joined by a special guest to talk about these big stories, plus our wins and fails of the week. Today is Friday, May 16th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Welcome to CityCast Denver, the show about the city where the auditor isn't afraid to go after any business allegedly committing wage theft, not even our strip clubs.
Not even the strip clubs are safe in Denver.
Did you see this story?
Yeah, I saw this story, and then I saw the follow-up from Denver Business Journal that the owner, who's one of my fascinations in town, the owner of RCI Holdings.
The Bombshells guy?
The Bombshells guy. Apparently business is not going good for the Bombshells Corporation. The World War II themed restaurant. The downtown Denver one seems to be going strong, but across the country they're closing locations.
And I feel like they never opened that one in the suburbs. I don't know. I don't remember.
The one that was going to be a food hall? Yeah. That fell apart too.
The restaurant and food hall?
The breast hall. Sorry.
Well, this seems like probably not something that he's really into right now if he's being investigated for wage theft, because Diamond Cabaret, which this gentleman owns, could lose its liquor, cabaret, billiards, tobacco store, and private security employer licenses over this case.
No, he's getting cooked.
If you're watching this, we're taping from the lovely Dude IDK studios in beautiful historic Five Points. You've already heard his voice. Producer Paul Karolyi is here. Hi, Paul.
Hi, everyone.
And we have a great returning guest today whose voice you've also heard. He is the director of environmental action group Green Latinos, Ean Thomas Tafoya. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, just in January, I became vice president of Green Latinos National.
Vice president of Green Latinos?
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Well, thanks for joining us. I'm so excited to talk to you because we have a story today that you were directly involved in. We'll talk about a little bit later. Before we get started, we're working on a show about our favorite grocery stores in the metro area. They could be chains, family-owned shops, wherever you buy food and household goods. We want to know where you go and why you love it. So give us a call on the Grocery Getter hotline, 720-500-5418, and let us know where you shop. Again, you can text or leave us a voicemail at 720-500-5418 and let us know where you do your Sunday grocery shopping. Okay, let's start with our top story. What City Council did and did not vote on this week. Let's start with the big one, obviously, the women's soccer stadium vote. City Council gave an initial yes to the $70 million requested in city funds to purchase this land at Broadway and I-25 and also pay for some of the infrastructure that will need to go in to connect it to the neighborhood. But it's not that simple because this was the first of several votes that has to happen from council. Paul, you were in the room this week.
I was in the room.
Can you explain what went down? What'd you see?
Well, as usual, anytime you show up to City Council, you're reminded about how tedious the process of government is, and you appreciate that anyone wants to run for office at all.
It seems like one of the harder jobs, for sure.
It just seems like these people are just... It seems like a struggle. Everyone wants something from you, and it's very hard to figure everything out. And it all takes so long, and everyone's spinning you all the time. And anyway, the stadium deal was interesting because it was not the vote that I think it was being represented as.
It got a lot of coverage.
Yeah, I mean,
vote.
Certainly. I mean, and including from us. I mean, it's definitely a big deal because it was, as Council President Amanda Sandoval said, a handshake agreement that Denver was ready to take the next step in exploring spending $70 million. But what it was not was appropriating that money. So it was kind of an interesting scene in council. Like, I don't know if these people talk to each other, how it works or anything, but like Sarah Parody, councilwoman at large for the whole city, she went first. She had the first turn to speak, and she went off on like all this research she did. I mean, she and I had talked before some of our previous coverage. She was really digging into the details on the economics and the economic impact and all the who's getting paid what and when, and she was like, and this is why I'm voting no. It's a principled no on tonight's vote. And then Paul Cashman, who represents the southeast part of the city, went next, and he was like, so just to make it clear, my understanding is that this vote is not the last time we're going to vote on this, and in the fall we're actually going to vote on the money. And then he was like, so I'm probably going to vote yes, just so we can learn more, because I feel like I haven't had a lot of time to learn. And that set the tone for the rest of the evening.
I was just going to say, because we saw Parody was the only no,
Yes.
Sawyer was out, but everyone else was yes.
Yeah, it was unanimous except for Parody, who was the only no. And she was a pretty firm no. The rest, it was actually quite mixed. I don't know if you all saw the response or the vote or anything.
Ian, were you following this?
Yeah, I've been following this since it came out. I mean, I think Paul, actually, you and I talked when it first got announced. You know, from just, is this the right time to invest in it? I kind of agree with Sarah Parody about that. The amount of energy and resources it takes to build a stadium when we have so many stadiums. I think there's a subtext behind this, and I've spent time talking with people all throughout this week. Should we be supporting stadiums for people who ostensibly are the oligarchy? I mean, the sports industry is one of the biggest industries in the United States. If you look at the people who are on the board for this, I mean, board members from Starbucks, people who are well-connected, people who own part of the Washington football team. I mean, these are legitimate billionaires who are paying more than $100 million just to buy a license to have them come here. And they're getting not only incentives from Denver, both in buying this land, a possible tax increment financing into the future, but also the Cherry Creek School District and the city of Centennial have also put cash in on this. And so you say, is this, the right investment at the right time for the voters? And you've heard how much property taxes have just been people's issue, going up and up and up. These capital improvement projects are actually paid through your property tax. And so, I just had a lot of questions about it from an environmental sense. Am I excited about having a team? Yes. Do I want to see them invest in sports? I think that's fantastic. I also believe in adaptive reuse of stadiums. It seems like to me like the price of building a brand new stadium versus retrofitting to make it more appropriate. I heard the arguments, more women's restrooms and better locker rooms, but it certainly costs less than $70 million to renovate than it does to build something new. And so I've had serious concerns about it, and I think there are a lot of people in the community who share some skepticism. I think this vote says, hey, let's see where it's going. The last thing I'll say is, the person who's leading this charge, Mr. Cohen, also a huge proponent of the Olympics, something that I joined with many people to fend off, at least for a vote of the community. And so you say, another stadium, maybe not going to be used all the time. What's its use in the future?
Would it be perfect for future Olympics?
Yes. And what about the Levitt Pavilion too, which I helped fundraise for? I know you've worked on this for years in the music industry. What do they do with the stadium when it's sitting empty but concerts and events? And we already invested millions of dollars into building a stadium or an amphitheater just blocks from here.
I was just going to say, I think that visually or in your mind, it might not seem that close because we've got a highway kind of that runs right through it and the waterway, but you're right. They're not that far. Ruby Hill is not that far from this project. So you're saying like there's existing facilities that could be better used. Because I like what you're saying here, because there's the idea of supporting women's sports and then the idea of putting money into building a facility. I think that you can feel two ways about both of those.
Both can be true at the same time. And I definitely shout out to the idea of bringing a women's team here. I love it because I'd much rather watch the U.S. women's soccer team than the men's soccer team. I think that's true when you see the sellouts when they come to town. Again, two things can be true at the same time. And is this the right time to be making these long-term investments? At the same time, we're cutting staff, we're cutting services, sales tax revenues in decline, and people are very concerned about their property taxes. This is playing out in the State House and here at the local level.
You do wonder about the investment part. Like I tried to get Rob Cohen on our show before the vote. I'll probably try again before they vote on appropriating the money, but is it a good investment? Like if the city of Denver is being asked to buy in on this same, vision of future growth for this league, do we have any indication that there is going to be growth? I mean, we know that some people like watching the women's soccer. We know that it seems popular. It seems like buzzy right now. But then also the average player salary is $48,000 a year. That's who's going to be playing in this stadium when it opens.
Can they live here?
Then can they afford to live in Denver? There's just so many weird. It's all on future growth. It's all this big bet on future growth. And I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen the business plan for the stadium. But that's what I would want to see.
There's also an air quality piece to it that I question. I'm not saying that I know exactly what the air pollution values are in this, but you want to invest in a park that has a flyover that comes on it that's completely packed for several hours a day on both sides. This is an industrial area that's changing, so there's tons of diesel truck pollution on a regular basis in this community. Now, I'm very for open space, and we certainly need to restore access to the river, and we want it to be open to the public. I just want these things to be considered in the outset. I think we need to be centering the economic equity, the environmental equity. All of these pieces need to be in this thought process. And we also have to say, do the richest people deserve to get our tax base when we have so many other programs to pay for?
Yeah, part of my frustration with this conversation has been like, this is how we're going to get that infrastructure we need. This is how we're going to get those connective between Ruby Hill and this neighborhood. This is how we're going to get the sidewalks and the things we want. And why does it have to come with that? Why can't we develop that area otherwise into, parks don't make money, I guess, is where you could say that's why we want to put something there. But
yeah, you put a little bit of city money in to unlock. This was a big phrase on Monday night. Unlock hundreds of millions of dollars in private investment.
Sounds like a Dogecoin. Unlock your savings.
I'm just thinking about other projects that have been like this in the last 20 or so years. First Bank Center. That one was heartbreaking to watch it be destroyed. Speaking back to the environmental component, and this even relates to waste and more, which we're going to talk to later, such a great amount of what's headed into our landfills that is put on the public in general to host all of that waste. And to see that be built and to see it come down, I just said, how in the hell can this thing not be adaptively reused? Like, I just don't understand that in any sort of meaningful way. Well, you work in the concert industry as well too sometimes, Ian. Like, absolutely we could have continued to program that space. Levitt Pavilion has figured out how to do that in a residential neighborhood. I think that, the First Bank Center was like built and demolished in the last 15 years. Or if we're looking at the Dick's Sporting Goods Park, the park itself is fine, but all the development around it never happened.
And it's also bad air pollution up there too.
It's Commerce City.
Just saying that.
We're talking about Broomfield. I have to. We've gotten a correction on this a couple of times. I feel compelled to share this because I don't think it's technically called First Bank Center.
What was it called last?
Yeah, the naming rights failed, I guess.
Or no.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Just Joe F., thank you for writing in and correcting us. It's the Broomfield Event Center.
Sorry, the Broomfield Event Center, formerly the Orpheum.
Thank you, Joe. We're listening.
Formerly First Bank.
I saw many a good show there. That was
same. I saw Teresa Caputo, the Long Island
like the
medium.
Mission. It was like the Mission where they could like move the stage forward or back and still have the bowl. And now that I'm older, and getting older, I like sitting at a show sometimes. I never thought I'd live that day, 100%. But I have arrived.
But like, again, these are projects we've seen that maybe are good examples of why we don't need to build another thing and adaptively reuse what we already have.
Yeah.
Well, the league wouldn't come. That's why they're building it. Rob Cohen, he wouldn't want to build it.
I don't like that, though. It feels like a threat. Like, you can't have women's sports.
They already bought the license.
On the condition that they would build a stadium dedicated for women's sports.
Well,
this is what the league
they're
wants.
Building 2 stadiums because I looked this up. The city of Centennial is contributing land plus bond money from the Cherry Creek School District to build a temporary stadium at $25 million, only for them to go on to build another stadium in Denver. And you just think, like, right now we're going through the bond, right? The general obligation bond. And you think about, what do these things cost? $80 million, for example, would completely dredge and restore the water quality of Sloan's Lake. And yet we say we should build a stadium with it.
You're just saying there's a lot of other projects.
Opportunity cost.
It is an opportunity cost. And right now it's a very particular time to talk about it because, like, literally yesterday I was in meetings where they're going through all of these bond packages that are going to come to us. And I mean, beyond that, I'd love to talk at length about public banking some other time. But I mean, the same thing. There's Wall Street gains through these bond obligations. We're paying for the return 30% on interest often for these bonds, whether it's the schools or this. And this is your property tax that's paying this. And so it's a big circle, and we need to stop and think, who is benefiting? Can we cut out some of the middlemen? Are we providing the services to the people in our community that need it? Or is a speculative future just an aspect of the growing West?
And could we find a better solution for this land that a lot of folks want to see something happen on, because we've already had a promise that fell through, which is why we have the bridge to nowhere. But it is right in the middle of the city. So I can see where this could be enticing, because it could be something, like literally anything.
Where is this person? Where is this developer with this vision? If it's not Rob Cohen in the stadium, we've been waiting for it for 20 years. Now this guy has stepped forward.
Into a park. I don't know.
Park would not be on the top of the list. That's the other thing that was a theme on Monday night. Speaking of opportunity cost, since a lot of the money was coming from the Capital Investment Fund, this is money that goes towards paying for infrastructure across the city, which, as Councilwoman Parody and others pointed out, there is a long list of priorities that have already been triaged in terms of what we want and need and what people want to see. And housing is a big one.
Sure.
Transit infrastructure is a big one. Like this is kind of like jumped to the top of the list because the opportunity has presented itself to jump in and support this project. But if there's $7 billion worth of projects that have been deferred that the city wants to do.
You're making an even better case in a short period of what I was trying to say.
Oh, I'm just repeating what these people are saying. I have no preference. I want to say one other thing. We talked a lot about substitution effects, which was news to many of the council people, which was so funny hearing Chris Hines zooming in to the meeting and just being like, I'm learning a lot about this for the first time from Councilwoman Parody. I'm so glad that my colleagues know more about this than I do. I'm not sure about a lot of this stuff now, which was just like understandable. He's a human person like all of us. But the substitution effects we've talked about a lot. It's like, would a person who is buying a ticket for the stadium for a game just be spending that money somewhere else in Denver? Like, are we actually just taking the money that already exists and just directing it to a new place? Is that what this investment is doing? Or is it drawing people from outside the city to spend money here and generate new tax money for us, for our priorities?
A lot of hypotheticals.
But there was some real data that, yes, this was the ownership group that said this, but they brought some real numbers. I thought this was really interesting. They said that of the season ticket pre-orders, which they apparently have broken records, the breakdown from inside of Denver and outside of Denver is 37% are Denverites and 63% are outside of Denver. So if all those 63% of people outside of Denver do end up buying season tickets and they do start coming from the suburbs, from California, they talked about a few people from way outside of the state coming, and they do come and spend money in the city, that is a boon.
10 days a year?
I don't know how long the season is.
Yeah,
That's
a great question. How long the season is, and what else would be going on there?
20 games a year. I mean, like, let's just when we talk about are people coming into Denver and what are they spending? Yeah, sales tax revenue is a big piece of our overall budget, and it's a good thing to generate that revenue. But again, I just want to call in that so many of these spaces sat empty, and we ended up having to bail out so many of these during the pandemic. Right, there were huge funds, and Chris Zacher, who used to run City Park Jazz and Levitt Pavilion, was huge on trying to save even the smallest venues. But I mean, that lost revenue is real.
Yeah, but I like your point, Ian, about there are other ways to program other spaces for this use. I mean, just think about how much the concert calendar has expanded at Red Rocks in our lifetime. I mean, they're doing concerts in December there practically. So there are options and opportunities to utilize other spaces for this very purpose. And
if they still put the capital together and want to build it there on their own, right on.
Yeah, I mean, the $50 million
you know what I'm saying?
Is the thing. Like the $50 million to buy the land. Like, do we need to do that, or can they buy it themselves? That's another question I have.
And free land from Centennial, and $15 million from Cherry Creek School Districts, and $25 million for a stadium. I mean, pretty soon, you're saying the government is matching the amount of money that they put up to date.
And I
don't think it's $25 million for a stadium. What do you mean?
They're saying $25 million for this like design and development of the stadium that's coming out of the city of Centennial.
Oh, for Centennial?
The practice stadium. That would go to the school district, I think.
The school district and the city are both putting money. So you have kind of three government entities that are all putting their capital together to enable this to come.
Yeah. It's a big endeavor.
I think, what does this say about when the Broncos want to come renegotiate where people are?
I've got my eye on that too.
This came up when I was running for mayor, right? Everybody was like, well, how do you feel about that? I'm like, no, we can't be giving this kind of big giveaways away when we have so many infrastructure backlogs. There's just too much. And if you're in the weeds and you're saying it's mundane, and it totally is, to like have to sit through and look line by line for $8 billion in capital projects and make decisions, there's just too much. There's just too much opportunity cost to invest in that. And I grew up blocks from Elizabeth Stadium. We're from West Siders. We grew up in Barnum. I grew up in Barnum. I love the Broncos, but like, what does this mean for the future there? I really question.
We will have that debate soon, because they're talking about a site in Lone Tree, and I think a lot of Denverites are invested in this team staying in Denver. But that's a debate for a different day, I think.
Hopefully of the people.
I hope so too. I wonder if the National Women's Soccer League stadium went to a vote of the people, how people would feel. I bet it would be close.
I mean, it's still a possibility because you never know what's going to happen with the activists in town.
That's true.
And
I know one
We've
right
done it
here.
on Olympics. We've done it
Are
on
you
gonna
do it?
things.
Why not run about? Why not do? What would you have to do to make it a vote of the people? Would you run a ballot campaign or something? Maybe it's too late for this year? It would have to be soon.
You know, council could direct something to the ballot still. And this is something that is all being discussed. Excel franchise agreement's a big one too. That could be a whole show in itself. I think you really should consider that because it's headed to the voters of the people. Probably not this year, but you know, even when a new ballot is passed, like people can go and petition, and or a new law is passed. There's like ways of challenging that. I'm not saying that that's what I want to do. There's a lot of things that I think are in front of us that need to be done. This last year was the first year in 10 years I didn't run a campaign or collect signatures. I remodeled my own house, and that felt really darn good. But people are back at it, being like, what's next? What's next? And I want to plug, public bank. Like, I think us banking on our own future, lowering our costs and investing in our infrastructure is the future. I've had conversations with the mayor and his staff of saying like, this is the time. Because I sat on the bond committee last year for the schools. And when you think like, oh, this is $1 billion bond, but it's going to be almost 40% to pay it back. Like, we got to cut into that interest rate, and we need to control our own destiny. And when you saw the mayor's sales tax go down for housing, you said, okay, it's close, but people are saying this isn't the right funding mechanism. Again, I think public banking is the solution. And we've been pushing it in Aurora and Commerce City, and even the mayor sat and he said he'd be interested in looking at it. I know there's some council members. I think that this is the year with all this money going to the ballot. It's the time to think about that.
It's a lot of money. Do we know, Paul, what's next for this situation?
It sounds like there's going to be a vote sometime in the fall on the actual appropriation of the dollars. And I think that vote's going to be close. I counted 8 council members who expressed major concerns or wanted more information. We also know that what's going to happen between now and then is that the owners have committed to engaging with the community to do something they haven't done yet, which is to reach a community benefits agreement, which is a very big deal.
Yes,
ahead of the ball arena vote. The one thing council needed to see before they even allowed the vote to go forward, because it would have failed, was this agreement that had a lot of stipulations of the owners committing to do certain things that would have been legally enforceable for any of the signatories, so like the local nonprofits and organizations. And so the owners of the NWSL team have committed to doing that. It's a very short timeline. Torres and the West Side for the Ball Arena one took 18 months. They have 6 months to do this one. So we're going to watch that very closely.
We'll put a link in the show notes to that conversation I had with Jamie Torres about that, because community benefits agreements are an interesting component to any development, and they don't necessarily even have to happen. So,
yeah, and even if they can be negotiated, voters still could say no. Look at Park Hill Golf Course.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all about building leverage in the politics. I mean, if the owners think they have the votes, then they're not going to be as interested in making concessions to the community benefits agreement. But if they don't have the votes and they need to convince some of these 8 council members with skepticism, then maybe they'll be making more concessions, like something that Councilwoman Gonzalez Gutierrez asked for, which was committing revenue to funding free sports leagues for kids in the neighborhood, which would be, I think, pretty appealing to a lot of people. But I don't know if the owners want to do that.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see what happens with this. Well, we're going to move on to another council vote that was actually postponed. And it involves another neighborhood next to a highway. This is Globeville area, Swansea, and another expansion of the National Western Center. Council will be voting on this next week, and this expansion would include a 4,500-seat equestrian center, a 570-stall stable, a 160-room hotel, and 30 to 40 units of workforce housing in 580 parking spaces, which I thought was funny.
Oh, give me that sweet parking. Can't wait
I
to
was
park
like,
in every
I just feel the
single one of
urbanists
those
everywhere
spaces.
getting so mad.
Here's what I'm going to do when it opens. I'm going to drive in there. I'm going to park. I'm going to pull out, and I'm going to park in the next one. Take a whole day. Give me every single space. Test them out for myself.
Well, this would be an $812 million deal that they'll be voting on over 35 years, sourced from tourism taxes. Denverite reports that this would be an agreement to send $23 million per year for 35 years to the authority that is reshaping the home of Denver's annual stock show. So again, this vote is not happening until next week. Ean, you've worked closely with a lot of these folks on the community side of this, because there's community pushback from some folks in the GES community about this project. What do you think about this in advance of the vote?
Well, I think, shout out to the GES Coalition, who I think has been doing just monumental organizing there on a regular basis, and even has new sophisticated like texting tools and stuff, which I just really love. They are really asking for reparations, I think is the best way to describe it. And one of the big plights that they've been fighting over is this piece called the Triangle, which was supposed to be the new Coliseum, which the voters of Denver voted down with $50,000 campaign against that versus millions of people who were supporting it. And so the stadium conversation circles back. So I would really love for Mayor Johnston to keep his commitment about the Triangle. I've seen him meet with the community, and when we were debating in that community, saying that this was a top priority. These are homes that were taken, then a development plan failed, the homes were destroyed. The community wants home ownership there again. And I think the rapid gentrification in this community investment fund that they've set up and are wanting to reinvest into land banking, I think is really critical. The 2015 hotel tax that is supporting this money, and they would just authorize the release of it. The voters have already voted for this. This is when I ran for council the first time when this ballot issue was up. And I think at that time, coming back to opportunity cost, I remember one of my opponents, David, he was like, I think we should take $40 million out of this hotel tax and put that into an affordable housing fund. And I remember looking at him like, that's the idea. We need to be thinking about how are we breaking these pieces up. So I tuned in and watched some of that council meeting in retrospect. The council president was really, Sandoval was rather frustrated, I think, about like the projections of how much money would come into this rounding up fund for communities.
Let's talk about the rounding up.
I can explain that.
Do you want to explain the rounding up fund?
Yeah, there's an agreement, a binding agreement. So the National Western Center Authority is the governing body for the National Western Center. They've got this big expansion and renovation that the 2015 vote of the people of Denver approved. So this agreement that the community groups have signed on to, it stipulates certain things that the authority has committed to do. And the one thing that the authority actually has to do based on that agreement for the community is a roundup. So any money that anyone spends at the Western Center, at the stock show or any of these events,
concessions,
you get the iPad twisted around at you, and you get the option to click the button to say round up your payment. And then that extra money goes to this community investment fund, which is, they have their own board. It's made up of members of the community. Former Councilwoman Candy Sedabaca is a member of this board. So then they would decide how much money goes to this. And
so far it's raised
what the money goes for.
It's raised $176,000. I couldn't tell from that number if that was since 2021 or in the last year, but it's not a lot of money.
Their projection, the authority's projection, was $5 million.
Total over?
Yeah, $4.5 million over the course of the 35-year deal. So yeah, I mean, it's not a lot. It's not a lot.
It's not a lot, and it's inconsistent. At least that's what I believe the community is trying to say loud and clear. They want a direct payment back to the community for investment for the impact. I mean,
instead of relying on
this
of customers deciding to round up.
Yeah, and the impact of having 100,000 people come in every single day into your community is real. The buses, the trucks, the air quality, they've dealt with the construction of the highway. They've new data centers. I mean, it's just on and on and on because of the zoning, the underlying zoning in this community that is pressed up against this residential. And so they're saying, hey, if we're going to invest close to $1 billion in total across all of these projects, is getting the seed money of like $16 million, I believe was their ask, to have a sustainable fund they can do a revolving loan fund on. That money comes back and then they're getting consistent payments. They feel like that is the pathway to both reparations and freedom for themselves, and having some order of destiny over what they can invest in and not. And I think that has been at the heart of what this community has been asking for. They have been exploited and underinvested in for so long. They're being subjected to violators of pollution on a regular basis. And they're just saying, hey, the government has a hand in this. This is our money. Make us whole. I hope that the council does the right thing and finds a path together with the authority to say, like, yeah, we can invest more money in the outset to them and get them some more stability into the future. And then I think everybody moves on in a win-win scenario.
A few things on that. There are some very organized, well-organized, ambitious activists who are the loudest voices on this. They do not represent the whole community. There were people on Monday night that were lifelong residents of the neighborhood that supported this proposal from the authority because they feel like the community engagement that has been done over the last 18 months has been earnest and genuine and led to real results for them. Like they've talked about 60 meetings to do community engagement, 5 on just the equestrian center and the hotel. We're talking about direct cash stipends so people are actually able to attend the meetings, which is always a complaint because these meetings are like a pain in the ass and you work a long day and then who can show up, who can afford to show up. And the real results that the authority has committed to that they are not required to do. They've committed to doing public art. They've committed to connecting a bike pedestrian trail from the 51st Avenue RTD station to the community. They've committed to a fundraising day to support the Community Investment Fund, help brainstorm ways to support local businesses. Admittedly, not so big a deal on that one. Preferential access to hotel facilities, robust apprenticeship program, including the hotel apprenticeship internships, other opportunities, and the big one, a 1% hotel room night fee, which would lead to $5.4 million over the course of the agreement. So it's not just the roundup, it's the hotel room fee. So it's $9 million. So when the community, this GES group of activists says they want 16, the difference between 9 and 16, not that big of a deal.
Well, the 16 is the seed money. And I wasn't calling into question anything about the community engagement process. It's the outcome, right? The community isn't saying that the process was having 60 meetings was wrong or investing into communities. They're saying they went through this whole process and they feel like what came at the other end wasn't enough to make them whole. I mean, that's the argument. And I think the $16 million plus the $9 million you're talking about over time allows them to leverage it, to buy land and do so much more to control stability in their communities.
Yeah,
I certainly understand that. I understand why they would want that, and they very well may have the votes to get it on Monday night.
I also just see a community that's been fighting for decades for some really basic needs to be met that other communities have seen happen handily. I remember, I don't know, 10 years ago even, it's like, could we get a more full service grocery store? Or could we get sidewalks? These really basic things. And I imagine if I grew up in that neighborhood, it would be hard to watch money be poured into something in my neighborhood while we were still trying to get those basic needs met, as well as that underlying fear of, can I afford to stay here? I just feel like it's so much more complicated than the money moving hands. It's like, what are the priorities of the city? And I imagine that's part of what they're feeling is like, are we a priority for the city? Again, this is one of the most polluted zip codes in the country at one point, like you were saying. Yeah. And like, why did no one give a shit about us, 15, 20 years ago? Like it's really a difficult fight. And Paul, you said there's like some established activists working on this, Candice Adebaca, Shannon Hoffman. But I mean, to me, those are folks that are just devoted to something they really care about. And that happens to be the GES community, which is small, but also there's so much money going into this neighborhood. It's just, I don't know. It's very complicated. So I can see why council wanted to postpone this vote, because it clearly needs more conversation maybe to happen before they advance.
Yeah, maybe. Or some of them maybe realized that this was actually kind of a thing. I don't know. The comments from Chris Hines about the women's soccer stadium, where he had just like, I don't know what he had paid attention to or not, but it just seemed like he was coming to it that night for the first time somehow. It was like just figuring it out. So I don't know. I want to give all the grace to be they're doing their best. It's hard, but
they have to be
who
experts.
Knows why they vote on this stuff?
They have to be experts in so many things. I think that's the thing. When every time I watch council, I'm like, oh my God, this is a hard job, because you have to be an expert in infrastructure, education, tax increment financing, literally every little component that makes the city work.
It would be nice if they were experts in all.
Or they're trying things. To.
I think a lot of times they can. You vote on your gut. You vote on your values. Like Diana Romero Campbell on the National Women's Soccer League Stadium. She asked some questions trying to understand what the substitution effect was, got an answer, and then her justification for her vote was how meaningful it was to her to be able to coach her girls' soccer team. I think a lot of people that's going to resonate with. and that's how she chose to vote. Does she care about the same things that the activists care about, that the economists care about? No, but I don't know. It's politics, baby. That's what I always say. Like, everyone's got their own interests and values.
Well, when it comes to these large infrastructure projects and these big, large investments, for a lot of years, city council didn't even have their own attorney. And the big override at the Denver International Airport, a lot of that had to do with not being able to truly understand and look at the documents and have enough time. And I think that was a big push to kind of trying to change the structure and get more resources to council in their decision-making process. If you can hire your own independent consultants to take a look, do you have independent attorneys who are giving you the kind of advice you need? I think all of those pieces play a really big part in making sure we get really good fiscal decisions. But I will say that, yes, of course, politics is emotional. Politics is people, and people have emotion, and you can definitely be swayed by the people who are in the room. And having been the guy who sits and does the secretary and tells people when to vote, and you can't do that, then you have to sit through that mundaneness. I've heard many things that have moved me off the button, and I didn't even get a vote. Oh,
interesting. Yeah, I mean, it isn't. I hope more people would show up. The women's soccer stadium, they had so many supporters there wearing the T-shirts to support the team. It was good organizing. It was impressive. And they had Flor Alvidrez, Councilman Alvidrez, representing the district. She was wearing the T-shirt.
But sports is something that's really easy to get people to coalesce around. It's much different to me than this particular vote.
I've said this one billions of times. I feel maybe even on this show before about how we can light up our city for sports, but we can't for civics. It just like blows my mind.
Yeah, I think that's just human nature. Well, we'll be watching that council vote that's happening next Monday on this latest potential expansion of the National Western Center. Okay, our next topic, our hot topic, is related to something you worked on directly, Ian. 2.5 years ago, Denver voters approved the Waste No More initiative to make recycling and composting a requirement for apartment buildings and restaurants. And the city is still, in 2025, working on implementing that. Before we get to these changes that the city wants to make to the ordinance itself, Ian, can you give us like the very short version of what the Waste No More initiative, what did we vote on?
Sure. So the Waste No More initiative is a universal solid waste ordinance. That's what like the technical term for it is. But it says, hey, we got to have 3-stream waste management. We got to be thinking about where we're sending our waste. There's this whole idea that you just throw it away and it just disappears, but we end up absorbing that as a society. And when our landfills fill up, there are emissions that leak. Even those landfill emissions, the methane that comes from the breaking down food, it does have impact climate change, but it also pulls out other toxic air pollution that blows into communities. So the people who live around these areas are also impacted. Construction waste is a big piece of this. So construction waste is also recycling what we can, and there's been a lot of advancements in that work. And really the origins of Waste No More goes all the way back to when we ran the Denver Green Roof Initiative in like 2016. And we were pushing back and fighting for solar panels and green roofs and white roofs on all of these new gentrified buildings that were particularly coming up in town, right? And people would sign it and they go, yeah, I'd love solar panels in my building, but I don't even have recycling. So we knew then it was so important. And when you talk about, we've carried environmental initiatives, that one at 51%, we won almost 72% with Waste No More. I mean, when people talk about a political mandate, 72% is pretty phenomenal. And, it's clear because we've carried other ballot issues in there that we as a team of environmentalists and activists who push these, we've talked to 50,000 people probably easily. The door knocking on each one of those campaigns, we know that people are for the environmentalism. We made it took us longer to write this ballot because of COVID, or we wrote it and then we were petitioning it. And you have to imagine, like, we were outside at Cheesman Park pushing a pen across the table and we still got the signatures. We weren't sure we were going to make it. We ended up missing the year that it was supposed to go on the ballot. So the next thing that happens, it rolls to the next election. One of the lessons I learned, having written many a ballot issue now, is that you should put like 365 days after implementation or 2 years after passage, instead of saying July 27 or July 1st, 2027 or whatever, those very precise dates. And so because it passed later than it was supposed to, we knew that we needed to sit down in a task force and try to make some changes to this ballot to make it align with the timeline that we were on. I had in previous years not sat on those task force because we're doing so much work and we share that between the people on our team, but we continue to see them roll back. I mean, the green roof ordinance.
But let's say what was the ordinance that folks voted on?
What they voted on was saying that restaurants, it's a phase-in approach that we have to recycle from construction. We have to have recycling and composting for apartment buildings, and restaurants and businesses have to recycle and compost. You don't have to compost if you don't create food waste. So that's the most basic part of it.
So, but now we're in the phase where there've been these this task force and these looks at how maybe this needs to change or evolve. And like you said, it takes a while for something to be implemented, but I can see where 2.5 years in, we haven't seen anything. What is the state of this right now? So
the task force met actually at the very tail end of the Hancock administration. And the last couple meetings took place on the flip to the new mayor's administration. And at that time they were like, let's vote on these recommendations. And people were saying, well, I don't know, like I'd really like to see the ordinance language. They were like, you're going to see the ordinance language in early 2024. We're just seeing it now. And we met with the mayor a few months ago and he was like, hey, like these are some of the changes we're thinking about. The thing about this process is, and why I chose to serve on it, and I hadn't previously, because it gives them another bite at the apple. When I say them, I mean the interest with the lobbies who have the power to say, oh, I don't need to implement this. I don't want to implement this despite the will of the voter. And they continue to claw it back. And so really we're in kind of a situation where we have like 3 big pieces that we're still concerned about. We recognize there need to be changes. And for the most part, we're in alignment. But the first biggest one is it alters the targets for recycling from construction, which is more than 50% of all the waste that comes out of Denver, right? So we need to have these goals ramp up over time. 50% is pretty easy to hit with concrete, but we need to get at the wood. We need to get at the metal. There's other things that we can salvage. And so right now there's like that's saying on a floor, and the original ordinance said, hey, this like ratchets up over time so that we're getting more effective at diverting waste. Another one is about the size of events that have to recycle.
Like community events, festivals,
community events
like
and festivals, and people who are pulling permits. And they're basically saying if you have 1,000 people or less, you don't have to compost. If you have less than 350 people, you don't have to recycle. And I mean, you can see how quickly all of that waste lands up. And coming from the industry, we know it's possible. And these were not exemptions that the industry was asking for on the task force. So sometime between the task force and now, the mayor got it in his head like, this is what we want. It feels like maybe the industry's asking for it, but I've been asking around. I know the festivals I work for are easily implementing these pieces. And then the last one is saying that any business that makes less than $2 million a year or has less than 25 employees wouldn't have to compost, even if they produced food. So it's a coffee shop. I mean, there's so many businesses that are already doing this. And we started campaigning for this in 2020. So you would think by now and the growth of the industry, this is very possible and doable for people.
So Ian's saying that it's very easy and possible. The actual problem is the money. Like it costs money. The ordinance says you are required to do it, multifamily residences and restaurants. So they have to figure out how to pay for it. That's why this is hard. That's why the mayor is maybe having second thoughts on implementation, is because according to the Climate Office, I just got this yesterday, their estimate is that multifamily residential buildings, which are apartment buildings, they'll have to pay $350 to $700 a month for recycling and compost service. Who's that going to go on to? The renters. This is going to make it more expensive for the people who live in these buildings. Restaurants, which are already screaming about labor costs, about food costs, about people not wanting to go out to eat and spend $20 on a hamburger. Their estimate is about $70 to $490 a month. So that's as much as $5,880 a year of additional costs. Events with 2,000 attendees and 5 staff support, their estimate is $1,750 to do this. That's why the mayor is having second thoughts, because he's trying to keep our sales tax revenue up so we can keep providing all the services that we want to provide as a city, like, for example, free recycling pickup at single-family homes.
Well, those are because
that's a different thing, but it's also recycling, and it's important, it's related. He wants to be able to provide these services, so he's looking at things like Waste No More, and he's thinking, where can I find a compromise? Where can I keep costs down for Denverites and for business owners who want to grow, who want to build their lives here? And maybe they care about recycling, but they also want to do the basics of their lives.
I think handling your waste is the most basic part. You're not talking about the cost savings that happen from switching from waste. This bill doesn't make them create any new waste. It's asking them to redirect where their waste is going. Okay? I hear what you're saying, that you're saying there's a cost, but I'm not hearing you talk about what it costs already now to send it to the landfill and what that offset and the difference is. The overall cost is not the same as the delta. And I think you should dig into some of that part and then
I'd love to.
I also just think that, like you said, the way that folks voted, close to 72% of voters said yes to this because we want to do it. But I think, Paul, what you're saying is the infrastructure part is expensive.
Well, of course we want to do it.
But how do we balance those two things and allow folks? Because my mom pays for a private composting service because she lives in an apartment building. She's already paying that. But that's by her choice, I guess. If it's mandated by the city, then you're saying that your apartment complex may put that off onto you, the renter. And I see that being a struggle too. I wonder how we balance these two things of being friendly to businesses, but also being better to our climate.
It's a democracy problem too, honestly. And if I were you, I'd be thinking about the ballot language I put on and ask people to do. Because I think you're right. I think that voters said mandate this. So that means that maybe they weren't thinking ahead. Maybe not everyone was making this decision about costs and benefits, and like maybe a community festival wouldn't be able to exist because they wouldn't be able to also pay for recycling and composting. Maybe they weren't thinking about that. But I would be thinking like, how much space am I giving the mayor and the city government to do these compromises when it comes to implementation? Because is it a mandate, or is it like saying we'd love to do this and maybe let's figure out a good way to strike a middle ground?
72%, I would say, is much higher than, again, 51% and trying to strike a ground and move around the middle. I also would agree that the ballot process allows for an open and democratic process to make changes to this. Where the real issue is that none of these three that I'm bringing up to you were not part of this open public task force recommendation process.
What do you mean? Let's talk about the restaurants.
The three that I'm calling out right now in this proposal, the $2 million and the less than 25 employees, this was not ever discussed in a task force with all of these different stakeholders, including renters and small business owners and large business owners and apartment buildings. And at that time, this was 2 years ago, they were saying something like 80% of the apartment buildings already provided recycling. So some of this is like already like in motion and already happening. I think it's the fact that no one, the people who wrote it, the people who had worked and were asking for changes and been tapped to spend the time you're talking about, not compensated to participate in that process. And then you see things that come out the other side that weren't part of that. That's the part that erodes people's faith in democracy.
I agree. I think it's a question for the mayor. Like the restaurant piece is interesting to me because we've been covering that. But I asked the Colorado Restaurant Association, who you'd think would see a cost like this imposed on restaurants and be like, absolutely not. Sonia Riggs, the head of the organization, she was part of the task force. I asked them for a statement yesterday about these compromises, and she was like, we don't know the latest. We're not interested in weighing in. So it's like, so it really was, I think it is just the mayor. I think you're right. He just made a decision. He's probably pulling these levers. He wants to make open for business. That's the directive right now in the city.
I think you can be open for business and be sustainable. Again, you're not creating new waste, you're redirecting it. As all of this comes online, the costs are going to come down, and they've already come down as costs. And when you say it could cost anywhere from $70 to $600, what a wild difference. It's volume-based pricing. It's based on who produces the trash. And that opportunity cost is put on all of us. We all pay for it when it ends up in the landfill and sometimes leaks in our water and ends up in our air and is causing climate change.
I agree. And most Denverites agree with you too.
Well, we'll be watching this because it's at least according to the Denver Post piece, this will start rolling out next April.
Technically, it's already the law. And I think that what's so interesting, they tell us, so many people call from the apartment buildings all the time, like, where's my composting? Like, I want this to happen. And enforcement is a challenging piece of this. I think, but it is already like in place. I think when this new ordinance is done, I think it'll all begin to like phase in and the construction and some of these other really critical components. Because again, like composting has so many other benefits on like the back end, like for our environment and everything else. But the construction waste is such a big piece of this pie. And I think that is like a part that doesn't get as much attention as like recycling your coffee or composting your coffee.
I think it's hard for folks to picture sometimes. You know, when you recycle at home, you know exactly what you're doing with the waste that you're diverting. But if we're looking at a construction site, like you said, there's so many different types of materials, and what that looks like in the recycling side of it, we don't know really. Okay, it's time for our Rocky Mountain highs and lows, our wins and fails of the week, things that ruled, things that sucked. Start with fails so we can end on wins. Paul, do you want to start with a fail?
I would love to. I've got such a great fail. I mean, It's great. It's sad. I don't know. Have you all ever been to the Colorado Gator Farm down in the San Luis Valley?
Yeah.
Have you been?
Of course.
You remember the star attraction?
Happy Gilmore.
Yeah.
Morris the Alligator, the famous
Of an undetermined age, we learned.
Yeah. Sadly, Morris the Alligator passed away this week. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
Gosh,
I guess that's a famous.
Paul, this really is a ding to our celebrity
Maybe they
culture
should
you're
build a
trying to
stadium.
cultivate.
for the Gators.
They need to have a star attraction down there, and maybe they should build a stadium.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, that was just sad news because that was, that's a cool place. They got a bunch of other Gators though, so I'm not that worried about them. But
Yeah, but that's like I would assume that's a bigger draw, was being able to see that particular alligator.
maybe. I don't know. The funny piece was I read in the Gazette that the plan from the Gator Farm is to taxidermy Morris
Oh, goodness.
because, quote, it's what he would have wanted.
Because
Like,
we
okay,
know what alligators
sure.
want.
Great. Love it.
Well, then they can still show him off,
Yeah.
That's funny.
Ugh.
That place is so, yeah.
It's a roadside attraction. It's got those vibes. for
It's the
sure.
most not AZA accredited place I've ever seen.
Oof, rough. Well, rest in peace, Morris. Ian, what's your fail?
I've been disappointed with this back and forth about these. They call them flock cameras, but they're like,
Oh my God. I'm with you.
The readers. And I just saw in the news, I don't know if it was last night or this morning, but the mayor's back out there saying, well, we feel like we can conceal our data for ICE, so we need to continue to surveil you with these like flock cameras. I've seen them even worse in other communities. Like they have the shot spotter in Commerce City, and when it hears it, it shoots off a drone that flies to the area. I mean, this kind of like surveillance and facial recognition is something that we've pushed back on for a long time. Actually, the pandemic inhibited us from passing we were petitioning for a ballot that would have banned facial recognition use by the police. And it's just a fail. Like, it was great to see council say no. And then now to hear that it's coming back and asking them to vote yes because they can conceal the data a little bit more, I just don't like it.
Well, and this was my fail as well. The mayor initially had told council, I think you should vote no.
Yep.
Let's end this contract. So for him to come back again, I'm with you. I'm really frustrated. He said that he told 9 News the camera system is, quote, valuable to fighting crime. It's too valuable to discontinue this. And he said that in spite of these valid concerns that the data could be shared with federal immigration agencies, he's not worried about it. And I don't know how you can't be worried about it in this, what we're seeing happen all over the country right now. I wouldn't trust that data to not be shared. So I'm super disappointed in the mayor.
It was interesting, the turnaround, because he told council to vote no.
Yeah.
So
and now he's saying, let's do it.
So they voted on
happened?
it. Does he veto it? Is that what, I don't know what the process is. I'm curious what happens.
Well, no, they
next.
voted no so they could send it back to renegotiate the contract.
Okay.
So it bought them the time to do the right. And now that they made some changes around the edges of the user agreement,
I see.
they want to send it back to the voters. But again, it's just millions and millions of dollars. Where are they going? At the same time, you're hearing about how they want to do 40% increases for some of these folks that are at the highest levels of government, but janitors are having their time cut. I mean, really critical positions are sitting empty. That was another one that I contemplated saying, of just like
the cabinet,
the cabinet
for
increase,
cabinet
well,
members.
and in particular, you see the one at the airport, and my God, the $16,000 business and first class tickets that those folks took to go to a terminal summit. And then you're like, yeah, they definitely need to make 50 grand more a year. Like that's real.
The Washington, I think, said it was in their policy to be able to do that. So.
Yeah. And they're saying
So
we'll have
take
brain
that.
drain, and then we'll lose people to other places. There's a lot of other things in salary that keep people here in Denver. And
Yeah.
I also want to keep people gainfully employed that are at the lowest rungs of our city government in payment.
Well, let's.
You said that in Commerce City, they have cameras
That trigger-
hypothetically, say I blow a red light in Commerce City.
It's a shot spotter, so it's like when a gun goes off. But hypothetically, we are on our track to some dangerous territory of
drone would come at.
Well, I mean, you already can get a red light camera, right? Same thing. I've never really been supportive of the red light cameras. I always thought that what would be better than red light camera is a countdown that tells you how long the light really is. Like when the hand's counting down and it's accurate, you're like able to judge more effectively.
I
about
mean, I
what
watch
you're running.
people blaze through those way after the fact. I don't think that would stop people. But we had this
Did
conversation
the ticket
earlier
stop
this
people?
week.
I don't know.
Right,
know.
right.
I got a $500 ticket for going through a red light in Fremont, California once.
Damn.
I know. I turned right on red, and they sent me a ticket in the mail for $500.
That
was
would
It's
get
so
like
people
the
to
upset.
stop
tolls. It's like
speeding.
those tolls going after people right now
It
too.
was crazy.
All right,
You're
well,
always watched.
let's move on to our wins
Didn't
this
like it.
week to end on something good. Ian, what's your win?
Well, I want to shout out one of my besties, Green Eyed Bandits, Green Chili correspondent Justine Sandoval's birthday.
It was this week.
Love her
yes.
so much.
Future gubernatorial
Yeah,
candidate.
love her so much. Great friend of mine. That's one of my highlights. I'd say the other one is just the continuing again the bonds moving forward. I think there's some cool things. Yesterday I was there. South Platte River restoration, Sloan's Lake. Some of the pieces are making it into there. There's, we're talking about close to $1 billion, possibly more, that might end up in this. Pay attention. Right now, they're making the decisions about what's in or out. There's some things that are hanging along the edges. And it doesn't matter if it's like there's fields for children and athletic fields and public restrooms and some of this most basic dignity stuff that I heard over and over again on the doors. And so I just want to really encourage people, track along with that bond process and get engaged, and then let's go vote for it. And hopefully, I'm going to continue to advocate for public banking where we can leverage more of our investment and see more of that money returned to our communities.
Well, we'll be watching the bond process for sure.
You got me interested in this public banking thing. I do want to talk about that at some point.
Paul, what's your win?
Well, I mean, the one win, obviously, you just have to give it up to the owners of this NWSL Denver team. This is not, for me personally, I don't have an opinion about it, but
You sound like Sean Keeler at the Denver Post.
They're raking it in. They are.
It's
dude.
a win.
They're running a good campaign.
it's a win. They got a win. The mayor was celebrating with all the fans at the bar on Colfax after the vote. And then I don't know. I mean, you got to give it up. And then the other one was a new attorney general candidate has entered the race against a few other people, including Jenna Griswold, our current Secretary of State, who's running. David Seligman, who folks might know from being the executive director of Towards Justice, this activist law firm, does a lot of work on workers' rights. He's sued Uber. He's sued landlords here in Denver. He spoke at the Bernie AOC rally up in Greeley a few weeks ago. So he announced he's running for attorney general, and he raised, this is the win part, $250,000 in 24 hours.
Wow.
Which is great. And especially in comparison to Jenna Griswold's 24-hour haul, which was $185,000. And she already held statewide office and had a
That's
higher name
interesting.
recognition. So I would say that is pretty impressive for Attorney General candidate David Seligman.
I think that's going to be the race to watch for sure.
Definitely.
Some
I'm
really interesting players in there.
very interested in that one. Bree?
I'll finish out. I want to shout out to my friend Clay McComb, who now works for the Denver Regional Council of Governments, but used to work at the Climate Office. And he hooked me up with this. He connected me with this rebate to get a new heat pump water heater. And it was installed this week. So
You got a heat pump?
yeah, I got a
What
heat
kind?
pump.
What brand?
I didn't look at it. I don't know. I trusted the guys that came and put it in, and I used my hot water this morning, and it was amazing.
That's
So
good. Cool.
it's our first step in going electric. I'm hoping to get an electric stove next. I'm tired of, after talking to Sam Brash about the huffing fumes every time you cook over a gas
true.
stove. I really was like, we gotta change this. So that was our first step. And I just want to shout out Zero Homes. It's the company that helped me navigate this whole thing and figure it out. And I now have a new heat pump water heater. It's great.
You should look at that Restore with Habitat for Humanity. You get a stove for probably like $100.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
I
I've
love that
donated
place.
stuff at Restore. I love that place. I didn't think about appliances though.
Oh, they got them.
I love it. Well, I'm on my way to going fully electric. We'll see. Well, Ian, Paul, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
See you next time, Bree.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. Our producers this week were Paul Karolyi, Olivia Jewel Love, and Natalie Rivera. Adam Sage edits our video for YouTube. McKenna Harford writes our morning newsletter, Hey Denver. Abby Madigan runs our social media. I'm Bree Davies, your host. Our music is by Los Mocochetes with additional mixing by Tyler Lindgren. If you haven't already, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, follow us on Instagram at CityCastDenver, and tell Rob Cohen for the 100th time about us next time you see him. You can sign up for our daily newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. See you next week.